Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. Wow, we have finished Neon Genesis Evangelion, the initial 26 episode series. Feels weird. It feels weird because there's still so many unanswered questions. There's still lots of plot points that haven't had resolution. We've reached the psychological resolution for a lot of our characters, but that's pretty much it. We've not really, and that's mainly been Shinji. We haven't touched on Asuka or Masato or Rei or any of the other characters and what's going on. And I'm assuming that that's going to be End of Evangelion's mission, we got an hour and a half to sort through everything else with the series that we've had loose ends with. But I've pretty much decided at this point, I'm recording this in the morning, I'm going to watch Death. I've got Death pulled up here, Death True 2, whatever the version Netflix has. I have it pulled up here. I'm going to watch the first half of this, which is just the Death version, which is basically a recap of the series. Because I wanted to watch the recap the more I thought about it, because one, it feels like it's part of the Evangelion experience. You need to see it, even if it's not necessary. But two, I've had a lot of people in the comments say, are you ever going to go back and rewatch the series? And I'm like, my brain is just now getting over the first time. But I figured this would be a nice little kind of compromise. I don't know if I would ever, it would be a long time before I re-recorded me going through the series. There's so many other anime and so much else I need to see and want to see. But I figured this would be a nice compromise. So I get to be like, okay, well, we'll go through this and just kind of, I'll talk my way through it as we go. And I've got a notepad to take some notes and then bring Whiteboard Kun out and do like a little a mini recap. And then I've got a lot of notes from episodes 25 and 26 that I want to go over after the fact. I want to save them till we're done. And then that'll kind of be cool to touch back on these notes and see how they connected to the recap. So that way the discussion's pretty fun and it's not just, it doesn't feel like I'm just, watching a recap of everything. I'm not usually a recap person, honestly. I don't usually watch recaps. I'm like, I've already know what's going on. But with this series, it feels warranted because there's so much going on with Neon Genesis, but also it feels like it's been like a solid week since I've watched episode 26. I need to refresh myself before this afternoon when I'm going to go into End of Evangelion. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I'm probably going to post on YouTube and post on Patreon as well, but I think I'm going to split it up. At first I was like, I'll watch Death and End of Evangelion in one solid review. The more people comment, the more they're like, you're going to need a while to sort through everything. And the more that I want to give End of Evangelion justice, I'm probably for this week going to post just this recap and the notes. And that'll be a nice little break, okay, good. We're going to take a little break before we dive into End of Evangelion, because I just have a feeling, that an hour and a half worth of Neon Genesis content, it took me 2.5 hours to get through 22 minutes. It's going to take me a while to get through End of Evangelion. I just already know it. And I have a feeling that I'm not going to be able to do it all in one day and record it and get it ready. It may be multiple days of analysis. So with that being the case, I'm going to give myself a solid week to sort through and get it to where I want it to be. Because I want it to be the best analysis I can make it. And I want it to be fun for you all. So I don't want to rush it. Right? I don't want to do like what some other studios do and rush the ending. I want to take my time and put my passion into it like Anno did, right? Right? So that's the plan anyway. And then there's so much other Neon Genesis content to get through. I'm making a whole Patreon and YouTube community post about it because I mapped out the rest of the year for Neon Genesis content. The rest of the year. There's just so much. I love this series and I want to give it justice. So there is that. But I poured myself some juice and I'm like, I'm going to sit down and rewatch a little recap. I'm very curious to know in 70 minutes what they give us that are the highlights, what they feel, what Anno and them feel are what we need to pay attention to. And that's probably what I'm going to take notes on as I go, is just, okay, what do they want us to pay attention towards as we go into End of Evangelion? That's probably what I'm most interested in. Like what parts do they feel like are not necessary for us to know and that are necessary for us to know. So we shall see, right? But I'm pretty excited, y'all. I hope you all are too. We've made it this far without being spoiled. I'm so excited to get into End of Evangelion and have no clue what to expect. I feel like that's the way you need to go into End of Evangelion. I mean, I figure that my theory is that it's going to pick up right where episode 26 leaves off. And I think someone even commented, they were like, the intermission, like the last shot of Death is the first shot of End of Evangelion or Rebirth. So I'm like, okay, so we're ending with Shinji saying thank you and picking up right where it left off. So I'm assuming that we're going to find out what's been happening we were in Shinji's head for the entirety of episode 26, so I imagine that we're going to pick up what's going on outside in End of Evangelion, or that's what I'm hoping is happening. We've done all the psychological inside work. Now let's figure out what's happening on the outside. But we'll talk about that with End of Evangelion. So we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to dive right into the first half of Death and Rebirth, or Death True. It's like Kingdom Hearts. There's 5,000 versions of it. It's like, what do we do? And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Well, that was a lot of fun. That was a great recap. Oh my gosh. I'm really glad that I watched that in all hindsight. So the version I ended up watching, which I didn't really realize until after the fact, was Death True squared, because it's like Kingdom Hearts. We have too many versions. But I am glad I watched that version. It was either that or Death and Rebirth. I actually thought it was Death and Rebirth because, but I did the Netflix version just because it was a lot easier to access. And I'm going to watch End of Evangelion anyway. So if I did Death and Rebirth, I was just going to watch the first half and then the intermission. This worked out great. I wasn't spoiled. And the cello scene, the stage, it all makes more sense now. I'm really glad that I watched this. I took some notes, and I've got notes from other people that I'm going to tie into that. But, there's a lot to talk about. So I want to go ahead and just review this for you all before I dive into End of Evangelion. I'm going to eat some lunch after this and brace myself for End of Evangelion, but I wanted to go through a few things. First of all, I really liked the cut of this recap. I'm not usually a recap person, but the way that it was cut, I was like, okay, no, it was really well done. And it wasn't necessarily chronological, but it was more like thematic cutting, like getting the characters, like it cut everything with Masato you needed to know, everything with Rei you needed to know, everything with Asuka you needed to know, and then tying it all up with Shinji and Kaoru at the end. I want to make note, during the actual reaction, I was like, oh, that's Kaoru, because his voice. I was like, oh, that's his voice, it's Kaoru. And then we started going over Toji's backstory and his view and his bout as the 13th Angel / Unit 3. And I was like, oh, well, no, maybe it was Toji that was the 4th player. Going back to the stills, that hair, no, it was Kaoru. So our quartet, our string quartet, which makes more sense, it was Kaoru. But yeah, so we have our quartet. I want to make a note of that. Then we have our string quartet. The first player is first violin, and that is Kaoru. Of course it is. Our second player is second violin. And all of these kind of make sense when you think about it, that you have the first player 1 is Kaoru, of course, and he is the first violin, and it makes sense. It makes sense that he and Asuka would be tied together because he was tied to Unit 2. You have both of them tied to Unit 2, which makes sense. But also, Asuka is literally the second fiddle. She's literally playing second fiddle. Her least favorite thing. She's always been lamenting this entire series that she's player 2. She's not the first person that they contact. They're not the first person that helps. She's always in the wings as backup, and she's literally the second fiddle. I'm like, that's beautiful. And so then we have the third player, which is the viola, and that is Rei. Not quite a violin, a little bit different than a violin, just a wee bit, still a string instrument, but I like that Rei is the third player because Rei, this is the third reincarnation of Rei, and it ties to all the times we've had the number 3. Makes sense. And then the number 4 got brought up a lot in this recap, but the 4th player is the cello, and that is Shinji. It makes sense, even though he's the third child. I guess you have the first, the children numbers don't make sense, but the number 4 came up a lot in this series, in this recap. And so I thought that was interesting. It makes sense that Shinji's the 4th of the quartet and Kaoru is the 1st, right? They're polar opposites on the spectrum. But all together, they're playing Pachelbel's Canon, which is one of the most famous works by Bach. I love Pachelbel's. Pachelbel's Canon is an interesting choice. I'm going to kind of skip around in my notes here. Because with Pachelbel's Canon, the thing about it is, and I think I made note here about it, is that there's a thing, if you ever watch, there's a guy, he reviews songs called Todd in the Shadows. I love his work. I've like watched it for years, but he talks about the 4 chords of pop, and that's Pachelbel's canon, because there's 4 chords of Pachelbel's canon that get repeated over and over and over again. They're the easiest chords to learn, and they're used constantly in modern music because they're very easy, they're very recognizable, they are just overused over and over again. So you have, ironically enough, with Shinji, we talk about the number 4, there's the 4 chords of Pachelbel canon that are some of the most overused in music, which, there you go. So you have that, but this whole thing about the recital, that's the thing that floored me the most, is because it gives context to episode 25 and 26 of the stage and the chair. It gives a context to it that I'm like, oh, okay. So basically, this entire recap is really it covers the content of episodes 1 through 24, right? And then episodes 25 and 26 are represented in a sense through this whole thing with the quartet, right? And the whole thing that it has to do with that. I went back and when I got done with the reaction, I went back and did this. So it was 18 months before Shinji killed Kaoru, right? Meaning 18 months before he came to Nerve and became part of them, because we established it was like there was a 9-month stint. What was it? Looking at the timeline here, there was 9 months earlier with Kaji and Asuka. So yeah, so Kaji and Asuka, basically interesting. So 9 months. So we had 9 months prior to Kaji and Masato together. We had Asuka and Kaji leaving. So essentially leaving to Japan. So the timeline's a little weird, but essentially you had Second Impact, if I'm doing this right. You had the Second Impact, and then we had Shinji's recital, and then you had Asuka and Kaji coming to Japan, and then you had Shinji with Kaoru. I'm just going to shorten that up for the sake of it. Yeah, so it's basically just trying to establish some kind of a timeline, but because it's Neon Genesis, it goes back and forth in weird ways. It cuts, you kind of just have to piece and puzzle it together. But this thing with the recital is really interesting, because I think of all the recap stuff, like I talked through the recap, the recital stuff is the most interesting. So it says that it was in Tokyo 2. It was in Tokyo 2 and was a set formerly Matsumoto in the Nagane Prefecture. All right. And it was at Junior High 3. Yeah, Unit 3, Junior High. Of course it was. And then it was taking place 22. So Shinji shows up 22 minutes before recital practice with the cello. So 22 minutes before recital practice, Shinji shows up, which is like the length of an episode. So it's kind of cool if it's tying in with 25 and 26. That's kind of cool. And if it's tying in with before End of Evangelion, that's pretty interesting. And then so the strings quartet, where they're going to do Pachelbel's canon. And so we have Shinji. Shinji was playing, and I don't want to look any of these up because I'm afraid of spoilers. Even though it's Bach and you would think I could look up these titles, I'm just afraid. I know the Neon Genesis community. It's probably going to be tied to spoilers, so I'm not going to look up these titles. I'm going to trust you all in the comments to at least, I don't consider telling me the meanings of the songs to be spoilers. Telling me how they get incorporated into the plot, that would be a spoiler. But just telling me what the songs mean or the lyrics, I don't consider that a spoiler, as long as you don't be like, hey, Romania, look at this lyric particularly and what it's meaning. Don't do that. But like, I do want to know like if there's any significance. And y'all, especially those of you on Patreon, have been super awesome about doing that. So But his thing is Vorspiel. And I'm sure that how they spell it, the Japanese spelling might be a little bit different. But that was his that he played for Bach. And then Asuka's was Gavotte in Rondo. That was hers. And Ray's was we don't actually get Ray's. That's interesting. We don't know the one that Ray is doing. We don't get her song that she does. We just know that Ray shows up 5 minutes and 43 seconds before practice is supposed to start. Which, whatever that meaning with that 5 minutes and 43 seconds, I'm not exactly sure. But then Kaoru shows up at the end, and I love that Asuka gets onto him. She's like, "You're late," and he's like, "I'm sorry, didn't mean to." And he's like, it says precisely, he's the first violin first player, and he looks at Shinji and goes, "Ready?" And Shinji's like, "Yeah." My shipper heart. I'm like, I want them to play together so badly. I was like, girls, and the girls are like in between them, but I was like, just Kaoru and Shinji facing each other, and it leads into the whole thing with Toji, the 13th angel, which leads into Kaoru being the final angel. It's like, I like that, just kind of giving you like a subtle idea that, yeah, from the start, there was going to be a humanoid angel at some point, and Toji was kind of the preview of that, right? Like the foreshadowing, right? So the whole recital thing, I freaking love that angle. That's great. I'm like, yes, please. And Whiteboard Kun is like trying to like lower itself towards me. But yeah, as far as my notes go with that, I'm going to try to tie them in to the notes that we get from, that you all had from episodes 25 and 26. I'm glad that I didn't go over these notes yet, because there was a couple things I was like, oh, all right. So we're going to get to those in just a minute. But yeah, so the true form of Evangelion is death. So I liked this idea of tying the Eva's, so the Eva's true form being death. Which kind of makes sense, because a lot of this recap, they kept saying how the Evas were wanting death and destruction. They just want the world to end. And I was like, tying to the Primordial Soup and the Instrumentality Project. That's interesting. So then there was a tie to Base 2, connecting to Adam, maybe Unit 2. They talked about the DNA from Adam having a physical fusion. So I'm like, was that Gendo and them and Nerve trying to experiment to create the Evas and like connect the person's physical or soul to the Evas, like what they did with Yui, or what we think they did with Yui? Or was that the birth of Kaoru when they were trying to fuse that physical form with Adam? Was that the birth of Kaoru? I don't know. We'll talk more a bit about that. But yeah, and then it cuts. The cuts were amazing in this. Cutting from Asato's past with her father's death, instantly to her having sex with Kaji. That bridge, connecting those themes of thinking Kaji's like her father, and that connection where she found out that maybe she did love her father, like when he died, connecting that to her having sex with Kaji and loving him. Great. That was wonderful. And I find it funny, it was 9 months earlier when Kaji and Asuka were arriving. Lots of like, we talk about womb envy and like different symbolic imagery with pregnancy and things like that. The 9 months is not lost on me. I'll just say that. But yeah, so tying to Asuka with the extra footage in her past. There were a couple little extra shots thrown in here that I thought was really good. Like when Shinji he sees Asuka, when he's about to meet Kaoru, he sees Asuka like at the kitchen table. I don't remember that being in the episode. I thought that was pretty cool. Since not Misato, it's not been too long since Rei met up with Gendo and Shinji again after she was first introduced. They only said 5 years. So when Ritsuko's mom died, let me get this right. Ritsuko mom died. And then 5 years later is the present. That's not a lot of time. That's not a lot of time has passed. So what? So that's curious. I'm interested about that. But I mean, it would make sense if baby Rei at the time was only like 8 or 9, she'd be like 14 in the present. So I guess that's not unheard of, but that's interesting that it's been that short of a time since Ritsuko's mom passed away. That's rather interesting. All right. And so I thought it was interesting too that Shinji, that tie-in and comparison of Shinji choosing in episode 1 to save Rei versus we juxtapose that in episode 24 with him choosing to kill Kaoru. That's a really good juxtaposition. I thought that was a nice parallel, like a contrast there. And so we have the whole thing about the recital, Volsper. The exit sign, the stage, the idea that in episode 25 and 26 that stage wasn't just a random stage for no reason, that it was connected to that recital, to Shinji's past, I wrote down here in my notes that it was the cello recital, the string quartet, the stage parts all connect. Like we see shots of all the different things behind the scene, the tea on the ground, everything. It all connects to that stage in Shinji's mind, connects to episodes 25 and 26 and where he's at mentally. And what I love about that is that chair is the same one used for his performance. But during that performance, Shinji went back and lamented to Kaoru that he was just existing with his sensei. He didn't feel like he had a purpose or any reason to exist on that earth. So at the recital, before the other players showed up, right? Because I think the idea of Asuka and Rei and Kaoru are all mentally in his mind. But the idea that before that, when he showed up with the cello and was just doing the recital, that he was just existing, that he still hated himself. He didn't see a purpose. He was just going through the motions and doing something. And I'm sure his sensei probably told him to like take up the cello to give him something to do, but he wasn't passionate about it. So he's just kind of going through the motions. And I love that this idea of the recital kind of imitates the whole problem with episodes 25 and 26. It's like Shinji and Asuka and Rei, they're all together. The gang's all here. They're all going through the same struggles in these episodes. But here it's kind of embodied just with this recital. And at the very end, Kaoru shows up. So is Kaoru going to show up in End of Evangelion? I really hope so. He's dead, supposedly. But it's Neon Genesis Evangelion. I'm holding out hope. If anything, hopefully he'll be in the rebuilds. I really want him to be in the rebuilds. Like, seeing him in this was, even though most of it was just reused footage, it reminded me of how much I love his character. And I just wanted him back. Like, all we saw was the shadow. All we saw was the shadow of him. We didn't get to see his face like we did with Rei and Asuka, which was so disappointing. But it seems fitting that we only see the shadow of Kaoru in this episode. Seems fitting we only see the shadow of him. I miss him so much. I wish he will come back in the further episodes, movies. I hope he does. But yeah, I really love that. And just the idea that we go from this recital and Shinji just existing to him having the others around him performing this recital practice and then tying it to episode 26 where he comes to the realization. He still may hate himself. He may hate himself still, but he's come to the realization that he wants to be here. He wants to have a purpose and he doesn't want to not exist. So I thought that was great. I freaking love it. The AT field, the anti-terror field, the wall of our heart, getting to tie back to that. The Eva's true nature being of death and destruction and kind of tying as a means to start the instrumentality. That it makes sense. That whole kind of nihilistic approach tying to the instrumentality and what Gendo wants to do. We have that. It was great seeing this because I lamented that back in episode 26 when we were going through like the different parts of Shinji, like talking about in episode 26 the different parts of Shinji he kept tying back to. There was that moment he crossed the threshold, and threshold's mentioned a lot in this recap with the Evas, but him crossing that threshold, I thought it was him like getting out of an elevator at Nerve, but no, it was him stepping into Masato's house and him blushing and saying, "I'm home." Like that idea of belonging and crossing over, breaking through that AT field to interact with someone and connect with someone was that. And I thought that was so great. And it was mentioned in the same breath almost as the AT field itself. So I'm like, that seems literal. It seems intentional, right? That was done for a reason. And so Shinji, and we tied that to Masato talking about her wanting to be the bad girl and not wanting to have the good girl image. We tie that to her drinking all the time, to being kind of crude, and Shinji seeing that. But the thing about it is, with Masato, that despite all of that, despite her presenting Shinji this like dirty girl version of herself, Shinji still thinks she's not a bad person. Now, I think that's pretty important how he words it. He doesn't say she's a good girl. That's not what Masato wants. But he says she's not a bad girl. Like, she's not bad or evil. She may not be good, but she's not bad. So there's a big gray area in between that, right? So I think it's interesting that we bring that up. And so from there we have Shinji playing the cello, but just not, he's like, there's a few shots of there where he's playing the cello, and it's really where like he's getting drug away, like after Toji dies and he's getting drug away, where he's playing the cello but he looks like he's in pain. And I was like, oh, so he like just seeing that Shinji is like existing, but he's going through this mental turmoil and connecting it back to that just existing and playing the cello and not doing anything, not taking action and being responsible. I was like, that was a really good move that this recap did. And then we have Asuka coming in, and the violin music that Asuka is playing is the music that Shinji is listening to when he has that moment with her. There are a couple people in the comments talking about how that they didn't think that Shinji was attracted to Kaoru. And I was like, if you want to think that they're just platonic and that Shinji was just starved for affection, that's fine. That's fine. I have shipper goggles on, of course. But rewatching that scene with him and Asuka where he is blushy, I'm like, okay. If y'all are going to tell me that Shinji was attracted to Asuka because he was blushy and getting all up on her, then he was attracted to Kaoru too, because he was doing the exact same thing. So either he's starved for attention and he's platonic with both, or he's attracted to both. But I don't think you can do it either way. I don't think, if somebody tries to argue with me and says, oh, he was attracted to Asuka but not Kaoru, but they're doing the same things and he's reacting to them the same way, I'm gonna call BS on that and be like, no, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Either he's platonic with both and he's not interested, or he's interested in both. That's the way I look at it. I don't see how you can try to argue one over the other, because even though, and Asuka and Kaoru both treat him totally differently, right? So, and I'm sure somebody will comment being like, well, he was attracted to Asuka despite her being, totally rejecting of him. I'm like, well, she was rejecting of him, but she came into his room and sat next to him. That shows him affection. So, I don't know. I thought that was funny. I was like, yeah, no, he's attracted to both. It's fine. And it's fine that he is. Or it's fine that he's platonic with both. Neon Genesis, as I'm going to talk to y'all when we do the notes here, you can have whatever view you want to of this series. I think Anno intentionally keeps a lot of things vague so that so that people can have these debates and discussions, and it's fun, right? The one thing we were talking about this in the Discord was that I was like, well, some people say that stuff's confirmed, and I don't remember if it was Bright Girl or Isabel, one of the two were like, there's been so many people that have just taken rumors or half confirmed things in Neon Genesis and preach them as the gospel and the truth. You have to take it as a grain of salt. And I'm like, okay, good. Because yeah, my theory is unless an author comes out and says it like intentionally in an interview or puts it out there in black and white, I'm not going to treat it as fact. Like I have lots of theories and things that I think this scene is interpreting, but I may be wrong. And that's fine. That's why we can debate and have fun with it. But I think it's interesting because some people have been like, it's a fact that this, and I'm like, show me some receipts, and we'll talk about that in a few of the comments. But I was like, I need Anno proof before you tell me it's factual. But yeah, I thought that was just a great scene, a great tie back to Shinji and Asuka, that he was listening to that song that she was playing for this. And again, that's tying to the fact that this is all happening in his head. So he's connecting like the violin music she's playing to that memory of the music he was listening to when he had that moment with Asuka. I thought that was genius. I love it. So yeah, we have the montage of the Unit 2 and its destructive capability, but then we instantly montage to the psychological destruction of Asuka. And I thought that was the way that the recap does that montage. I was like, okay, is that making a nod that those people that seek this destruction and violence constantly, they're going to end up just getting psychologically broke down by the end of it. And I don't know if that's like some kind of reference to like if you've been in action through the military or something, that's going to lead, like if you just get sucked into that life and can't get out of it, if it'll psychologically break you down, because it's happened to a lot of veterans, if that was a tie to that. I was thinking that kind of symbolism, that's what it connected to for me. But the idea here that Asuka, she is like using the O2's unit's destructive capability to the fullest, but then it ends up just psychologically breaking her down. I thought that was interesting, the way that the recap kind of cut all those scenes together. Cut that big giant montage that went through like 3 episodes worth of footage, but then we still play the elevator scene in full. I was like, okay, Neon Genesis, not surprised. Not surprised at all. That was really good. So then we have Rei showing up and connecting to her. And so I like that the way that we end Rei's scene is cutting to Shinji's fascination with Rei. But oddly enough, we have Shinji getting super blushy with Asuka, Shinji getting super blushy with Kaoru, but with Rei, he doesn't really get blushy. He's fascinated by her. And we cut to the scene where Toji and Ida are giving him a hard time. And he's like, no, it's not like that. It's not like that. It's with Rei, it's different. And it's like, so it's almost like a different kind of affection with Rei, a fascination with her. It's different than with Asuka and Kaoru. And I thought that was interesting to note. If it's true that Yui is somehow tied to Rei, then it's probably a good thing that Shinji wasn't attracted to her. Just gonna say it's probably a good thing that wasn't the case. But yeah, his fascination with her is interesting. And then I love that we get a big old montage and connection here to her growing closer to Shinji and seeing how Rei views Shinji and the connection to Shinji looking like Gendo. Rei is similar to Gendo in that they both want to die, which around episodes 25 and 26, that gets brought up, that Rei regrets that. She doesn't want to die, and that she keeps coming back. And then we cut straight from, we go through Rei being constantly self-sacrificing, and it really didn't dawn on me until watching this recap that, yeah, Rei has tried to kill herself like multiple times. A lot in this series. And I remember somebody commenting back around episode 24, 25, maybe it was 23, saying like, oh, in the extended version, Gendo shouts Rei, and somebody in the comments was like, no, I think that's back in a previous time. We get that answered in this recap, but I was like, man, she's tried to blow herself up a lot in this series. But the idea of her sacrificing herself, we instantly go from that to Fuyu and Yui's conversation with baby Shinji. That doesn't seem by mistake, right? That furthers the idea that Yui and Rei are tied together. And so we get a reminder that Fuyu-chan gave all of his research to Akari. Imagine that. And that he's worried for Yui. But Yui's like, I need to sacrifice myself. She's like, I'm fine with sacrificing myself because it's to save Shinji. And it's for the best. It's for what Seal wants to do. She's like, I'm going to go along with Seal because it's what's best for Shinji and the people I care about. Which kind of ties to Rei. Rei goes along with Gendo and Nerve, and because she's doing things to save Shinji and the people she cares about. It's all kind of tied together and connected, right? Which is interesting. I was going to look back and see which computer was of the Magi was attached to Ritsuko's mom, but I'll probably go back and edit it and put it up here for when I edit this together. I'll probably do it there and do that. But Rei, there was a shot of Rei when she's getting strangled by Ritsuko's mom that I thought we saw Kaoru in Rei's eyes. What? I thought for a second we saw Kaoru in Rei's eyes. I'm going to have to go back and see if that was a thing. But I could have sworn that we saw like an image of him in her eyes as she was getting strangled. What? So there's that. And then Pachelbel's canon being tied and Kaoru is the first violin. So there's this weird thing here. So I'm going to put this up here and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. I'm about to the point where we're going to talk about the comments from y'all from episodes 25 and 26. But we have supposedly God making man, right? Man seeing God, right? And then wanting to recreate God and ends up with Adam, right? And then Adam leads not only to the Evas, but to the angels, right? And possibly Kaoru and Rei. So there's that. And possibly Yui is tied to Rei as well. So there's that. But then there's the idea of Lilith. And Lilith created man. So it's a big old cross of confusion, right? And I don't want answers yet. I'm going to watch End of Evangelion. That will maybe explain things. But I wanted to make note of a few things. The transition of... There's this weird transition in the recap, and it was really well done. But it was of Shinji when he kills Kaoru. When he kills Toji, when he hurts Toji, right after Shinji witnesses Gendo telling him that he has to kill Toji and basically overriding the Eva and making him kill him, there's this montage where it transitions to Gendo saving Rei. So Shinji kind of is left in this weird place where he has seen Gendo save Rei, but also ordering Toji's death. And so Shinji is trying to understand. He's like, I don't get it. He's like, how can my father risk his life to save Rei, but at the same breath order me to kill Toji? Like, it's not that he hates life. It's like, what's the deal? And he goes to that conversation with Kaji where Kaji's like, well, you know, you can try all you want, but you can't fully understand anybody but yourself. He's like, you can't fully understand yourself half the time, much less someone else. So that ties back to Rei telling him that he needs to try to understand his dad. Doesn't pan out, but it's just an interesting conversation. And it seems like Shinji is trying to reconcile and be like, okay, why is my dad like this? Why is he okay with saving one person? And I keep trying to like keep my computer from going to sleep and not saving another, right? And so then we cut to Seal saying that, and we still get no answer for who shot Kaji, by the way. Not giving us the answers there. I kept saying they'd like give us like a glimpse, like a snapshot, but no, they didn't do that. And so then we cut to the whole thing with Kaoru, and Kaoru making the comment about how songs enrich the heart. Funny that. And then we have them all playing Pachelbel's canon together, right? Almost as if it's a soothing of his heart that happens at the end of episode 26. Almost as if that's the case, right? But we have this conversation that Seal has that man must atone for not learning from previous mistakes, which seems like Seal is kind of getting on to Gendo, being like, Gendo, did you learn nothing from the second impact? When we tried to play God, the second impact happened. Why would we want to do that again? Did you not learn? So it seems like he sent Kaoru, that Seal sent Kaoru to kind of stop that, right? But in the same breath, they wanted Kaoru to die. So it's bizarre, but they said man's hope is lined with sorrow. That line from Kaoru. Man's hope lined with sorrow. And that kind of ties to what Fuyu-chan said to him, be like, the source of my despair is the source of your hope. Ties to that I do like the idea that hope is lined with sorrow, that like there's often a lot of sadness that comes with someone saving others or getting that hope brought to them. And it kind of ties to other series too. We've talked about how like peace sometimes isn't caused unless there's been violence and destruction, and it's kind of a weird contradiction. So it ties to that. And then here's the thing, and I guess this is about the time we should start with the notes, because I had a couple of notes from episodes 25 and 26. And so Taha Amahamadi talked about how classified info page on Neon Genesis Evangelion, that I should go look at it after End of Evangelion. I might wait till after the rebuilds to go look at it. I'll probably ask Discord if that's a thing that will spoil the rebuilds or not. I'll probably ask them and see, because they've been pretty good about getting back to me about that. But Jimmy Russell, I think it was Jimmy Russell, and several others, they kept talking about how I said in episode 25 that it was Adam in Gendo's hand, and they were like, no, it's not, it's Lilith. And I was like, or that it was Adam in Gendo's hand, and then I was like, well, what about Adam being in the basement? And they're like, no, it's Lilith in the basement. And I was like, and so I went back and looked at my reaction for episodes 25, 24, and I was like, they don't say that. They say it in this. And so I was like, maybe you all were watching this and that's where you got it from. But the idea that the thing with the mask and the eyes is actually Lilith, and that the little specimen in Gendo's hand, and this is my sad attempt to draw a hand, is Adam. So and I'm glad that I watched this recap, because I was like, okay, because it felt like a spoiler. I'm like, I don't remember seeing that, but this kind of confirms it. So again, I don't want spoilers, but that opens up a whole plethora of questions like, well, why does Gendo have Adam in his hand? If Adam created the angels and the Evas, is he trying to control the Evas and Adam by having him embedded inside of him? Why did he need to have Lilith skewered? She's the one that created man, supposedly, so how does that work? And then Rei having the Lance of Longinus, it opens up a whole host of questions that I'm going to write on the other side of Whiteboard Coon in a minute and have ready for End of Evangelion. So that was interesting. I'm glad it got confirmed in this recap, because I was really struggling through. I rewatched episode 24 and I was like, it's weird. Maybe it was the subs I was using, but I'm glad that Kaoru kind of like comes out and says it in this episode, and it's clear. It's made clear, right? So there's that. Other than that, I don't really have on, I'm going to get to the notes everybody had here. Why use the Lance of Longinus on Lilith? Again. And then the angel with the bloody head at the very end, the statue, the decapitated statue of Kaoru with the bloody head. But the angel had boobs, so... In Neon Genesis, we're going to give you lots of questions and maybe we'll give you answers. Or maybe you can just debate about it as you go through the other movies. I do like at the end, though, when we have the end credits, that the water that the statue is in looks like LCL fluid. Very fitting. Very fitting. So, all right. So with all those back there, I do want to talk about the other comments that I had. So suggesting that Kaoru is maybe a hybrid of humans and angels. So maybe that has something to do with Lilith and the whole thing about Lilith birthing man. We'll see how that goes. I'm going to be reading the manga too this fall. Once I'm done with the rebuilds, I'm going to read the manga. So that'll be interesting. So I don't want any manga spoilers. If somebody's like, oh, in the manga, I'm going to be reacting to the manga. So maybe we'll get more there. It'll be like another recap on top of these, right? So that's going to be fun. But yeah, I'm going to be interested to see what all is given to us in the rebuilds and the manga in terms of explaining some more of the lore, or if they just ignore that completely. Cryptic Squid talked about how the seal's monoliths were inspired by 2001: A Space Odyssey's matte black slabs. Yeah, I've seen Space Odyssey one time, and I was hungover from New Year's when I watched it. Not a good movie to watch when you're hungover on New Year's Day. Let me say that. I was like sitting on my couch being like, what am I watching? Like that's where I was. So I've not remembered a lot from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Not a whole lot. Kaoru seems like he was seemingly raised for or by a cult to destroy Nerve and come in contact with Adam or Lilith, which is a fun comparison to Rei, who's seemingly raised by Gendo and kind of has a lot of similarities in terms of her goals as well. And so basically, Cryptic Squid was like, Shinji's the worst off because Shinji may not be the worst off because at least, you have Kaoru and Rei who are kind of raised for these various purposes, sort of like Shinji, or they're all together in their despair, right? Simon Lemon talked about how in episode 26, Anno said that it was meant to be a wake-up call for otaku to stop shutting themselves away from the world, that it doesn't solve anything, and that escapist art isn't enough to make one happy. That, yeah, you can't really fill that void in your heart. If you got one, you can't really fill it with just material things or escapist literature. You have to go out and do something, which is ironic because it's an anime series that you'd have to stay in and watch. So it has a message, it has a point. And I was like, this is how I have to reach y'all, this is how I'm going to do it. So I find that interesting. So thank you, Simon, for talking about that. Melania the Severed talked about how in episode 25, the psychological state I was asking about was called reaction formation. It's by Anna Freud, of course. And it is a defense mechanism that replaces an unwanted desire with the opposite action, usually used because of anxiety. And so when you bully somebody you have a crush on, that's a prime example. And so with Asuka, that's like case in point. She bullies Shinji a lot, even though she probably likes him, right? So Jimmy Russell, I will give you credit for this. Jimmy Russell commented about how Kaji was connected maybe to the Atom sample in the Unit 2 unit coming to Japan at the same time. That was cool. But we were talking about this whole Masato and Shinji and them having sex or her making sexual advances to him. And again, like I said previously in this video, unless you come at me with some receipts, I want to debate it and have fun with it. But when people are like, no, this is fact, I'm like, give me your sources. I'm an English teacher, damn it. I want to see a source, and Wikipedia is not a source. So give me the actual interview with Anno or the actual thing where you found this, right? I'm an English teacher. It's just what I do. But Jimmy Russell actually came in with some info. He came in with some receipts, and that is from the Neon Genesis film book, number 9, page 13. I'm like, oh my God, there's 9 film books from Neon Genesis. Why am I not surprised? But in that film book, and again, this is where things still get black and white, because even when Anno is talking about something in a film book, there's still not perfect confirmation, because Anno's like, why would I give you that? Because it shows in the book, it said, and I quote, this is a translation too, so those of you that can read Japan and have the film books, you may have a different translation. But it says, Masato stretched out her hand to Shinji. At this time, she may have intended to offer her body to comfort Shinji. However, this was merely substitute behavior in order to assuage her own loneliness. So saying that Masato, she may have reached out her hand to offer a sexual favor to Shinji, but nothing happened in the end. And it was not really because she wanted to have sex with Shinji, but just because she was lonely and she didn't really want to comfort Shinji. She was trying to assuage her own feelings. So, which kind of connects to episode 25 and 26, where Masato feels awful because she's like, I offered myself to Shinji under this guise of comforting, but that really wasn't the case. I didn't want to have sex with him. I didn't want to comfort him. I was just trying to make myself feel better. So that was good. So thank you for the receipts, Jimmy Russell. I'm glad you pointed that out. Cisco Ozeda talked about the Feliz Huevas meme, that it gained traction because it took on a meme of like Looney Tunes characters and changed to Asuka, and that the actress who actually voiced Asuka did a lot of memes with it during conventions and random gatherings. So I thought that's pretty cool. It kind of helped that meme gain traction by the actual voice actress using it. That's really cool. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Harrison Allen talked about episode 27 of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. And so I've not gone back and rewatched episode 27 of Full Metal Alchemist. I love Full Metal Alchemist, but I haven't gone back and rewatched episode 27, but I knew exactly what you're talking about. So mild spoilers for Full Metal. Just skip the next 30 seconds if you don't want to be spoiled. But in episode 27, Hohenheim has an entire kind of recap episode dedicated to him that takes a lot from episodes 25 and 26 of Neon Genesis. And I was like, oh, cool. Now I want to go back and rewatch that to see what happens, right? CW and Alex Cornejo. Oh my gosh, I was actually going to bring this up, so hold on. Okay, Alex Cornejo had made this comment along with CW talking about how that the first episode of Attack on Titan Junior High did basically an homage to the alternate reality that we see in episode 26 of Neon Genesis. And I was like, what? And so then Alex Cornejo shared a link to it. So I was like, okay, I want to go back and watch it after I do Death, and then see that connection and see how they compare with one another, right? So I thought that was really, really cool. So we're going to watch that here in just a second and kind of go back to that. But CW talked about how they're all different characters that kind of relate to there. And then I love they bring up the tie of necessity being the mother of invention. And that not only related to how episodes 25 and 26, they were on a strict like time crunch and they just had to do with what they could to make it work. But it's like necessity is the mother of invention. Does that tie to like the Evas and their construction, and maybe Yui's involved? And I was just taking it into a different place there, but I thought that was pretty funny. And so, yeah, Shinji and Kaoru, apparently there's an alternate universe manga where they're high school detectives together. And I'm like, I know that I'm not going to be able to have time to look through every piece of Neon Genesis media. I could just start a whole new channel of just that, but I don't have time to do it. So, but I do eventually want to maybe find that one. It makes me think of Fake, like the detectives from that series, but that's like a BL. But if you ship Kaoru and Shinji together, then I guess it works out. But I love that. An alternate reality where they're detectives together. Hell yeah. Super hyper energetic Kaoru and like super cynical, pragmatic Shinji. Match made in heaven. I'm all here for it. But yeah, so Alex Cornejo talked about the link to that. Also talked about how Isayama in Attack on Titan named Mikasa after a battleship, kind of like to have like a good luck charm. And she's kind of like Rei a little bit too, which is interesting, right? Apparently, according to Alex Cornejo as well, Anno took 3 years off the Finnish production of Nadia, his second series, because he was so burnt out. And it just broke him, apparently. And then he came back to Neon Genesis to gain that fervor back. And I was like, oh my God, you took a 3-year break and then you came back to Neon Genesis? And the way Alex described it, anything that could happen, happened. And it's like, what a trip. Like, I feel for Anno, like coming back after 3 years of taking off because you were burnt out from production. And then this is what you did after that? Holy cow, that's kind of insane. But yeah, Akira comments about how the report card at the end of episode 26 is actually the screenplay with movements and actions and expressions and dialogue. But see, like when I look at a English American screenplay, it's all written in lines this way, but the Japanese one is written in lines that way. So I couldn't tell it was a screenplay. That's wonderful. That's so freaking cool. I love that it's all a play, right? And it's all a performance. I love it. And a performance tying to the string quartet. I love it. I love it. I love it. And it also is kind of interesting because it's like a string quartet. So it's like at the end of the day, Shinji and Rei and Asuka and Kaoru are the ones pulling the strings in terms of controlling the Evas. So that's a nice tie-in too. It's very clever. I like it a lot. Loco Logic talked about how Rey in the English dub, she said the line talking to Asuka, saying, "Why are you, Asuka, defending him, Shinji? Are you riding his baloney?" And in the Discord after this comic came out, someone shared that whole alternate universe scene from episode 26 in the Discord. The fudge? What the actual fudge? Like, I was like, this is insanity. It's the perfect, if you get a chance, go look it up. It's the perfect combination of, it's English dub in the 90s. It's like, it's vulgarness, it's swearing, it's completely disregarding the original translation. It's hilarious and oddly sexual. That's like half of the English 90s dubs. And I'm like, okay, it's great. I was like, this is bonkers, and I'm kind of here for it. And then MC12136 talked about how I like anime. They said how I like my anime. They're like, man, episode 26 of Neon Genesis is exactly how I like my anime. A little mech action, feel good slice of life, getting unexpected depression and a midlife crisis, and then being cured again, leaving you without 1,000 questions. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much case in point how it goes. But also said that there's a lot of physics concepts that Neon Genesis kind of tackles. And I agree. There's been a lot of people in the comment section talk about the physics properties of Neon Genesis. I'm an English major. Math, I was okay with science, but math is not my forte. I operate on the opposite side of the brain. So I'm more interested in like narratives and character development and the emotionality of a series. But I will admit Neon Genesis does really cool things with sci-fi in terms of kind of tapping into some of those physics and science concepts and exploring them in kind of like a fantasy way. It's very interesting. And I definitely agree with you, MC, that this show has influenced not only how we can view the world and ourselves, but I'm starting to see the influence in other anime and other series. Someone shared on the Discord like something from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and it's Charlie in the chair like Shinji. Like you can tell its impact that this series has had. And again, I applaud the series for episodes 25 and 26 for sticking to their guns and for Anno being like, no, I'm going to end it how I want. Even if it doesn't look the greatest, it's going to end how I want it to end. And I'm like, and it's all the more iconic because of it, right? Whether you like it or not. And then finally, Croy Potts talks about how the beast that shouted love at the heart of the world is a reference to Harlan Ellison's book on sci-fi stories from the 1960s, but also it's kind of a pun and a double entendre because you have Japanese word I, which is love, and then you have I in English, and the English title for this episode is The Beast That Shouted I at the Heart of the World. So it's like a nice little pun there. It's like you're talking about love, talking about yourself, you should love yourself. It all ties to the meaning of it. It's wonderful. So I do want to take a moment before we tie it up with questions about End of Evangelion. I do want to tie it up with looking at this comparison between the opening of Attack on Titan Junior High from 2015 and the End of Evangelion, or the alternate universe scene from Shinji in 1997. Maybe they'll show it again in End of Evangelion. We'll see, right? But yeah, so, and it says End of Evangelion, so I guess they're going to tie back to this at the very beginning of it. We'll see. I guess that's maybe a tiny spoiler. It's not a big deal. Not for that. But we're going to look at it here in 3, 2, 1. And I have the sound off because of copyright. But let's look at this. Okay. And seeing Aaron and them in his room, seeing the same thing there. Rey or Mikasa, oh my god, and Asuka. My brain's already warped from this, so End of Evangelion's gonna be fun. And yeah, oh my god, Aaron's even wearing the blue just like Shinji. Oh, come on now. Come on. And then we see Yui and Gendo, and we see Carla and Grisha has the same thing with the newspaper. Oh my god, and then leaving them. Wow, that's amazing. And then they're both running down the same way. Fantastic. They don't want to miss their first day. That's awesome. And then they're going to run into, it's going to be Historia instead of Rey, right? Oh my god. So it's not exactly 100% like it, but then the way that he runs into her, he runs into her the same way. Oh my god. And she's doing the same thing with the toast. And then she hides her skirt and her legs and everything the same way. Except Except in this version, Eren helps Historia up, and Shinji lets Rei go on her own. Well, that and like Ymir shows up, and there's not the case there. Wow. So yeah, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect beat for beat scene, which I'm happy about, but it is noticeable. The homage is there. There's enough there that it pays a good homage. So that's interesting. So yeah, I've got a lot of questions about End of Evangelion that still remain. Who shot Kaji? Who shot Masato? Who shot Ritsuko? Those. What's the whole deal with Lilith and Gendo and the plan? How does this instrumentality work? Is everybody just going to become primordial soup and we're done? What's going to happen with Lilith? What's happening with Adam? Why is Adam in Gendo's hands? What happened with Fuyu-chan? By the end of episode 26, Shinji realized he wanted to be still in existence and wanted to stay on Earth. So where we go to with that? We've had part 1 of the look inside Asuka and Masato. Do we get a part 2? Are they just going to drop that plot point? We don't ever get it. What's the deal with Rei? There's a whole slew of questions. And I'm probably going to write them up here on Whiteboard Coon to be there at the start of End of Evangelion. So I'm planning on, just go ahead and plan that I'm going to have this out for Patreon, YouTube, and then next week we'll have End of Evangelion. Because I have a feeling if the recap took me an hour to sort through, End of Evangelion is going to be a trip. So, but we'll cross that bridge. So I hope you all enjoyed this recap and my discussion of it. Thank you all for the comments. I really, really appreciate it. But yeah, I'm pretty excited to see what all we go into with this next movie. And then beyond that, I'm going to be looking at the scripts, the alternate scripts for episode 24. I'm going to be looking at the end of the Neon Genesis Evangelion audio drama CD. I'm going to be looking at that. Dating sim, manga, the rebuilds. There's a lot of Neon Genesis content, and I'm really excited about it. So I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll see you all next week with End of Evangelion. I'm sure it'll be perfectly fine. Bye. Oh my God! God! Oh my God! Oh my God! What? She's like, I'm just gonna drag you there. Oh no, no! Oh no! Oh, that shot! Oh my God! Oh, it's an eye! Oh! Oh, no, I'm with Shinji. Oh, it could be either one! Oh, okay. Oh, little buddy! Oh, shit. Oh my God. Oh!